Hello everyone, and welcome to a new story. What if Naruto was in the world of Genshin Impact? If you enjoy, please like, subscribe and share the video to help more people enjoy it. I did not write this story. The original writer is Neon Zangetsu. Please support them. Now let's dive in. Why? Be it by luck or misfortune, a giant tree broke Naruto's fall from the heavens. Does? Well, relatively speaking. Broke was the operative word here. He hit every branch and bough on the way down. Always. Leaves, branches, brambles, you name it. Keep happening. Yup. He hit them all. To me? Every last one. Swear and spitting in a manner that would have made even the staunchest sailor blush, he flung out an arm and grabbed blindly for something, anything at all, to slow his fall. For the first time his chakra faltered, tearing his grip away against the sheer momentum of his descent. Not far below, the ground rushed up to greet him like a long-lost friend, ready to render him a greasy red smear upon the grass. Really, it wasn't fair. He didn't even know why he was falling in the first place. Smu, buddy! He roared. Work, damn it! Blue eyes flashed red and he flung out an arm. Here at last, the last dregs of his chakra responded. His body flashed into a shimmering shade of golden black. A trio of truth-seeking balls burst from his back and violently arrested his momentum at the last instant. As one, they hauled him back from the brink, turning a wild fall into a gentle gliding descent. Bare feet touched down against windswept grass, sending him stumbling forward 3 paces, no more. His knees soon joined them as his forehead kissed the ground. Ugh, a low groan muffled itself against the dirt. Kurama? What happened? The growl that answers was nothing short of irate. What always happens? Bad luck. How did we even get here? Naruto opened his mouth to answer. Closed it again. He didn't remember. He distinctly recalled one final clash with Sasuke, a horrible burning sensation in his right arm. A cursory inspection confirmed that it was relatively intact, albeit bloodied, then lying sprawled out on the ground beside him. After that, darkness. He cast a fretful glance at the sky, but whatever portal had deposited him here was nowhere to be seen. Something shifted in his peripherals. He looked up. Up again. Up some more. That's a really big tree. Absolutely gigantic, more like. Oh, a voice plucked at his ears. I thought I heard someone. Naruto whirled and found himself staring at young boy clad in green and white. Striking eyes gazed back at him from within a battered face. He didn't look to be in a good way himself. His clothes battered and torn, one hand leaning heavily against the mighty oak he'd come to rest upon. And for all that concern, he balked further still when he saw his wounds. What happened to you? Thank you for your concern, but there's no need for alarm. Despite his injuries, the boy managed a weary smile. I just had a bit of trouble with the Fatui. I didn't think they'd manage to find my resting place. Naruto blinked. Fa what now? You don't know them? Have you been living under a rock, or, oh? The boy tilted his head a fraction of a degree to the right, regarding him anew. Something bright flashed through his gaze, something ancient and unknowable. Naruto didn't much like that gaze. It saw him, pierced him, knew him in a way no mortal being possibly could. Just as well, then. The boy before him wasn't mortal at all. I see. The green-clad boy's smile grew another inch. You're not from this world, are you? Did you fall out of yours perchance? It would make for a lovely tale, I suppose. Naruto's hope shriveled up and died like a flower in the desert. Another world? And you're clearly strong, too, the boy prattled on, paying him no mind. After a fall like that, you should have a few broken bones at the least, internal bleeding at the worst. An impish gleam danced through his gaze as a breeze might through a sunny sky. There's a strong sense of freedom about you, too. Just how strong would you say you are? A seed of doubt took root in his heart. I don't much like the look you're giving me. The stranger ignored him anew. You might be just the one I'm looking for. A placeholder, if nothing else. Said seed sprouted. Oi! I'm talking. And I'm not listening, the boy chirruped. Relax, I'm not your enemy. As a matter of fact, a hand swept down, touching his green vest. I have a gift for you. With a whirl of windy light, he pulled something forth from his body and held it out for him to see. An intricate shimmering white-on-green chest piece, fashioned in the shape of a queen. It looked harmless enough, yet his mind told him it was so much more than that. His sixth sense bridled in the presence of it, not affronted, but alarmed all the same. His frown redoubled. What is that? I've been keeping this for a long time now, the youth confessed, holding it up for him to see. Maybe it's time I passed it on. Naruto edged back. You've lost me. Hey, the stranger scratched the back of his head. I know, it's a lot to take in. Basically, I'm not as strong as I used to be. I'm probably the weakest Archon out there now, especially after just waking up. I won't be able to keep this from them forever. But you. Once more that gaze of blue-green found his, narrow and intent. You're strong. Even without this gnosis. Tell me, you wouldn't be interested in ruling a certain nearby city, would you? Not a chance. He crossed his arms in an X-shaped formation. People should rule themselves. I don't know this first thing about this place. Surprisingly, it was the right answer. Ah. A true wanderer, then, here at last, his smile turned sly. I'll admit, I have ulterior reasons for doing this. If I give this gnosis to you, the Fatui will never get their mitts on it, and I'll be free to live my life as I wish, unmolested by their agents, so. Unbidden, he found himself leaning in as the bard presented the piece to him. Would you mind looking after this for me? I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm out of options. Kurama? Little help here? I'm as lost as you are. But if you do take, whatever that is, be wary. You keep using all those words. Naruto frowned. Archon, Fatui, Gnosis. What are you talking about? Don't worry, the boy closed his fingers around the shimmering piece of himself, a piece that Naruto was beginning to realize was his very soul. All will be made clear in time. You know I never did get your name. I have plenty of those. But for now, yeah, the dark-haired youth nodded once, almost as if he were speaking to himself. 20. That'll do. Here, he held up the chess piece once more. Won't you take it? Naruto considered the gnosis anew. Such a tiny little thing. It didn't feel malevolent or malign, no, not at all. If anything it felt, happy? Alone fingers reached out giving it a jab. Nothing happened. There was no spark, no rush of memories, maybe the faint stirring of the wind, but he might have imagined that. The boy giggled. It's not going to bite you, silly. Says the stranger offering me a weird piece of jewelry, so you just want me to hold on to this. It didn't sound so hard. He could just stow in a scroll or something. Seemed like a harmless errand. That's all I have to do? Nothing else? Well, when you say hold, I'm thinking more along the lines of. Venti moved with startling speed, slipping out of his grasp to ram an open palm into his chest. Naruto doubled over with a hiss and clutched at himself. He glimpsed a fair flicker of light time enough to see the gnosis slip into his ribs, and then the deed was done. Numbness pervaded the core of his being, but only for a moment. A strange weightlessness soon followed, bringing with it a faint feeling of something. He didn't know how to describe it, only that it was. Oh, he heard Kurama mutter. That's certainly something. I feel good. Really good. Hey, he straightened with a snarl and batted the bard away. That hurt, you know. Sorry, not sorry. Venti wriggled out of his grasp. I thought it might not. For a minute there, he danced back and sketched a low bow. With that gone, I should be able to move freely for a little while. Look after Dvalin if he causes trouble, won't you? I'll be wanting that gnosis back someday. A sudden swirl of wind swept across the tree, kicking up leaves. Naruto raised an arm to ward it off, and much to his surprise, the wind answered him in kind. It lashed out, wild and free, not with chakra, but another element altogether. When he looked up, the boy in green was nowhere to be seen. His world swam at the edges. I don't feel so good. Everything went black. So this green guy gave you his, what did you say it was? Gnosis. Naruto held up his hand, scowling at it when the odd chess piece failed to materialize. He called it that. Haven't been able to control it properly since. His reflection gazed back at him from the waters of the beach where he'd awoken, anger burning bright in his eyes. 3 days of this. 72 hours of wandering the wilds and foraging for food, all the while trying to make sense of this new, uncontrollable power. His chakra was fine, make no mistake. Kurama had never been stronger. But when one started conjuring windstorms just by sneezing, yeah, that was a problem. A beat of silence passed between him and his traveling companion. Her little nose wrinkled. Paimon doesn't get it. He stole a glance at her from the corner of his eye. She was a tiny little thing, Raider reminding him of some fairy from a certain storybook. Dark purple eyes shone like the stars from a pale face, regarding him beneath a man of thick white hair cropped short just above her tiny shoulders. Her clothing was just as outlandish as her appearance, for she wore a long-sleeved white jumper and a night blue cape flecked with stars, coupled with white stockings alongside matching boots. Odd rose gold embroidery flowed across her boots, the color of which matched nicely with her dark hairpin and the strange little crown floating above her head. Almost looked like a halo, that did. Was she an angel or something? Such a strange girl. And to think he'd fished her out of the water only a few hours ago. Wait, she snapped her fingers. He made you an archon. As he looked on, she performed a little twirl in the air. Like one of the seven. That's amazing. Naruto shrugged. The Hellry the Seven? The tiny sprite recoiled as if he'd struck her across the face. You don't even know about the seven? Wow, you really aren't from this world, are you? No, he drawled, favoring her with a bland look. I've only said that half a dozen times since we met. And really, a finger flitted out, poking her head in mild rebuke. For a self-proclaimed guide, you're not very good at fighting, are you? That last slime nearly gobbled you up. Hey, she stamped a foot in the air. Paimon's been a very good guide. You wouldn't know half the things you know without her. And I fished you out of the ocean. Naruto leaned back, hiding a smile behind one palm. That makes us even. HRRNGH. Her stomach growled piteously, cutting off anything she might have said. A blonde brow quirked at her. When was the last time you ate anything? She looked away, whistling innocently. Paimon doesn't remember? She was too busy arguing with her. All right. I can take a hint. He climbed to his feet, reached over and ruffled her hair, drawing an indignant squawk from the childlike being. Which way to the nearest city, impy? She sputtered. Don't call me an imp. She really is one, though. Naruto's snigger sent Paimon into a paroxysm of angry squeaks. Really, she was just too cute not to tease. Still, it was time to be off. Nudging that thought away, he turned his gaze down the sandy shoal, picked a direction at random, and started walking. With a destination in mind, his thoughts became clearer, less opaque with every step. He didn't have a particular destination in mind at the moment, nor a goal to speak of. For now he could only move forward. 7 gods, he thumbed his chin as his feet dug into the sand. All right. Good to remember? Paimon doesn't like the look on your face, why focus on them? Oh, no particular reason. Now was his turn to whistle as he set off down the path. Just 7 arses I may or may not need to kick in the foreseeable future. His brow twitched. Including the little bastard who put this thing in my chest without telling me what it would do. His traveling companion pursed her lips, but floated after him nevertheless. Paimon's starting to think you're a little touched in the head. He quirked a brow. Only a little? She huffed. Food first, bucko. Argument later. It was the start of a grand journey. Laughter and tears awaited them. Joy and sorrow alike. But it would be a beautiful journey nevertheless, one the world wouldn't soon forget. For better or worse, Teyvat would never be the same. Long live the new Archon. /N, clearly, the following chapters are going to be absolutely massive in size and scope. Once more, the Ember's rule remains. If folks don't like this story? Poof. Gone. Deleted for keeps. That's no joke, folks. I'm so busy these days, basically, I don't have time off. Not anymore. My free time is limited and as such, I can't afford to focus on something folks don't like. Reviews keep me writing in these times, and keep the daily updates flowing. Silence only hurts. I hate having to beg for feedback, but without it, well, it feels like I'm not making an impact. Must protect emergency food ahem. I mean Paimon. Definitely Paimon. To Mondstadt we go. Then Liyue. And one mustn't forget Inazuma. Madness and mayhem await. Right then, as ever, reviews are love, reviews are life. Reviews keep me safe from any and all strife. So in the immortal words of Atlas. Review, would you kindly? Every bit helps out. Future. Previews. Some are very far out indeed. Hope you enjoy the taste of what's to come. Boom. Naruto coughed once. Ow. Please done for, the culprit wailed. I broke the rules. Whoa, hey. He flailed his arms, startled by her tears. It's fine. You didn't hurt me. Well, aren't you a cutie? A giant fox slammed into a raging beast and slammed it to the ground. Calm down, ya damn dragon. Say what you will about this Gnosis thing, but it's made us more powerful. Naruto flung out a hand and the wind answered. Seems like this. Might have to experiment a bit. Where is it? 20 grind. He, I don't have it. Signora absolute licite. You little rodent. Lumen touched a hand to her forehead. Ow. Edit, because frankly, I couldn't resist. I'ma polish it up later. Wrong. This country was wrong. All of it. Every bit of it. Naruto inhaled deeply, chest swelling with wind and air. Hey! Paimon must have felt it, because she jerked back. Now wait just a second. Calm down. Don't do anything rash. Beidou sighed. Too late. Keqing yelped. Duck and cover. Raiden, his head snapped back as he howled at the skies of Inazuma. I want a word with you. Lightning answered. Still he snarled up into the heavens. This is not how a god should rule her people. The clouds answered, swelling with thunder. Get your ass down here or so help me I will drag you out. Something stirred in the air behind him. You know me? I am Naruto Uzumaki, Archon of Wind. He turned to face her as she stepped forth from the portal, unfazed by her beauty. Zhongli told me all about you. Ye told me more. Finding and fighting things like you is what I do. And you are absolutely a thing. Watch your words, her expression was nothing short of thunderous. I promised my people eternity. I am not a thing. No. You're only a thing, he stabbed a finger at her, jabbing her in the chest, much to her surprise. You're a puppet, while the real you hides away. You don't do anything. You don't live. You just hide in that sword. Like a child. You're afraid. I am not. A scowl wrought her face as she stifled the words. Is there a point to this prattle? Are you dictating your obituary to me? Balls of steel. Beidou muttered behind him. Big blasted bronze balls of steel. Listen, eh? Naruto ignored her, spread his arms, and stepped forward. It's time to give this country back to its people. This is your one and only chance to do so peacefully. This world doesn't need gods. It's time to give this world back to people. You and me? It's time for us to go. Her lance rose. You would stand in the way of eternity? No, he summoned his staff and matched her. Just you. Let me show you what life looks like. Two gods collided in a shower of joyous jade wind and violent violet lightning. Treasure. Truly there was no greater battle cry than this. Well, it was certainly the fiercest thing Paimon could muster. Naruto stifled a smile behind one hand as his travel guide all but flung herself into yet another wooden chest. Perhaps flung wasn't the right word. Paimon dove into that thing. Indeed, she delightedly delved into its depths with an enthusiasm that would have made even the staunchest of treasure hoarders blanch with fear. Kurama scoffed in the back of his head. How many does that make, now? Dunno, the blonde shrugged. Lost count hours ago. We're never getting to the city at this rate. Inwardly he agreed, this was taking more time than expected. Paimon's never-ending quest for so-called treasure had slowed them a bit. Ideally he could simply run there himself, but that would mean leaving her out here for the wolves. Outwardly he said otherwise. Wouldn't do to torment the poor thing, too much. You're a greedy little loot goblin, aren't you? Merely speaking the words drew a chortle from his old friend, and an indignant squawk from the tiny girl still slumming through the luxurious chest. Maybe I should call you Paygoblin instead of Paimon? What was that? Her retort was muffled within the wood, but audible nonetheless. A merry smile tugged at his whiskered cheeks. All too easy. You heard me. Really, she was too easy to tease. Hey! Sure enough, her head burst forth from the wooden vault, snowy hair showered in all manner of trinkets. There was even a second, larger circlet dangling off her tiara. Cheeks puffed out, lips pursed and starry eyes fixed firmly on him, she'd surely heard every word he'd just said. Naruto pondered the matter for a moment. Is this what it's like to have a younger sibling? Paimon's not a goblin, she winged said circlet at him, to which he nimbly dodged. Besides, there's all sorts of useful stuff in here, stuff that can help us. A blonde brow quirked. Such as? Her face scrunched up. Treasure? Naruto's other eyebrow rose to join the first. Paimon made angry Paimon noises. Paimon will show you. Before he could think to ask what, she dove down and came up with a hefty sack in one hand. It made an unfamiliar clinking sound as she showed it to him. It almost sounded like coins? A great many coins. Naruto felt his throat go dry at the sight. Who in their right mind left their life savings lying around in an unlocked chest? Loot is loot. See? His guide held up said sack and waved it like an almighty war banner. You said it yourself. We needed money. Now we have some. I did, he relented with a rueful sigh. Still, is that any reason to run around opening strange chests in the wilderness? Give it here. Paimon clutched it close and floated back with narrow eyes, suddenly afraid he'd take it from her. No. Finders keepers. I'm not going to throw it away, he chuckled. If you keep flailing it about like that, you'll rip the bag. Oh, her mood did a 180 in an instant. Here you go, then. The little fairy flung the sack of mora at him in an overhand toss. He caught it with ease, bounced it once in his hand, then unbound the string just to be sure. Under any other circumstance he might have something to say about her trusting nature. He certainly intended to, until he got a look at the contents of the pouch. "Ha," he muttered. "This really is a lot." Paimon hovered over his shoulder and touched a finger to her lips. He could hear her salivating from here. Enough for a whole bag of fisherman's toast? She sounded so small and sad when she said it, too. His stomach growled, reminding him that neither of them had eaten in the last hour. Softy. Maybe he was, but that wasn't about to change. Sure. Naruto closed the pouch, then reached over to ruffle her hair. "Guess it's on me." She batted his hand away with a smile. "Yup. Oh. And looky what else Paimon found." With a giddy giggle she delved down into the chest again. Really, how deep was this thing? And came up with a polished polearm that shimmered in the afternoon sunlight. Though its metal was pale, its tapered tip glowed a beautiful blue-on-green. Easily larger than she was tall, the poor girl struggled to lift it, yet presented it to him nevertheless. "Tajda." Naruto blinked, somewhat taken aback by the sight of such a lovely weapon. "What's this? Archon or not, Paimon thinks you need a weapon." Huffing and puffing, she dragged it out of the chest. "Here. You can have this one. It looks rare." "A polearm?" Kurama scoffed. "Ah." Naruto crossed both arms before his chest and huffed in a rare fit of childish pique. "I don't need a weapon. Why are you looking at me like that?" "Yes, you do." Her tone startled him. "Paimon doesn't want you to get hurt anymore." He felt a migraine coming on. Not this argument again. "Look, I'm fine. You can't just punch your way through everything." "Can and have." Only then did he notice the genuine concern in her eyes. She actually looked angry for once. Right, he'd not shown her his staff, his skills, or even a fourth of what he could do. He'd most taken down his enemies here thus far with quick punches and the occasional Rasengan. No need to show off. Unfortunately, that had left his little travel guide to languish under the misconception that was all he could do. Blast it all, now he felt bad. On a whim he held out his right hand. "Fine," a long-suffering sigh escaped him. "Give it here." Paimon perked up. "Really?" "Yes, really." Really? Fork it over before I give you a noogie." She did so with some effort, yet nevertheless managed to drag it into his open palm. His fingers closed around it, and a spark shot through his wrist, raced up his arm, and blazed into his right eye. Somehow knew its name the moment his fingers closed around it. Skyward Spine. The name emblazoned itself upon his brain. He held it up and felt strange faster for it. With his already considerable speed, that was saying something. Strange weapon. Strange, indeed. Ha! Not a bad weight. He kicked its long haft, producing a hollow clang as he swung it into position. Balance seems good. No idea how to use it, though. It can't be that hard. Paimon swirled around him. Just stick M with the pointy end. You do know I can fight without a polearm, right? I've been holding back. Now it was her turn to sulk. But Paimon picked it out just for you. Great, turn on the guilt, why don't ya? Still, it couldn't be that had. Sick M with the pointy end, she said. A rueful smile tugged at his whiskered cheeks. Taking it up with both hands, he planted his feet and closed his eyes. Naruto focused inward. He could feel the wind. It threaded through his fingers and sang in his soul beyond his control. Now was as good a time for practice as any. He clenched his teeth and pushed. Almost immediately he felt the gnosis in his chest flare to life, burning with anticipation. It didn't hurt, quite the contrary. As if someone had laid a warm blanket across his upper torso, so too could he feel it. This tiny new piece of him ached for action. It longed to be used, to be given the purpose its last master had denied it. Like a small child wailing for attention. Use me. It seemed to say. Don't ignore me. His smile became strained. Was that it? Was that why it kept acting up? Was it sentient? Alive? Thoughts for later, he supposed. He desperately didn't want to open that particular can of worms right now. Careful. Kurama cautioned. Be sure to hold back. As you are now, you might kick up a storm just by swinging that thing overmuch. Don't need to tell me twice. One step, one swing. That was all. Naruto stepped in, metal was warm in his hands, the wind surprisingly happy to oblige. He flicked it out in a lazy swipe and something buzzed in the back of his hand. Completion. Purpose. Peace. Yow. Those weren't his thoughts. What was that? Kurama flicked a tail in the seal. Don't look at me. I feel fine. Naruto tossed his head from side to side. It wasn't a feeling of wrongness, just something else. He felt utterly at his ease, his chakra intact, his spirit secure. His chest itched a little, but beyond that he confessed he didn't experience much in the way of discomfort. If anything, it felt pretty good. Paimon coughed into a fist. Are you alright? You've been staring into space for a while now. I'm fine. Casting his doubts aside, he moved into a loose stance. Very loose. As in he had no idea what he was doing. Soon enough the polearm danced in his hands and the wind sang a joyous song with it. In no time at all he lost himself to the flowing currents of the wind. The rest of the world became a faded backdrop, ever present but muted, ignored in this singular moment. In no time at all he lost himself to the flowing currents. This was a life free from all worries and cares. This was freedom in the truest sense. This was peace. Before long he forgot about holding back altogether. He pushed his body to the limit and beyond, forcing himself through a wild whirl of movement that grew gradually faster as he became accustomed to his new tool. Odd as it might sound, the Gnosis almost felt pleased with him. Laughter echoed in the back of his mind, high and reedy, reminding him once more of a child. Distantly he became aware of Paimon clapping, cheering him on. Go, Naruto! Go, go, go! Her voice echoed his every swipe, each thrust and whirl. He leaped up and kicked the spear, obliterating a nearby stone. A thought and the wind yanked it back, sending it sailing into his grasp. His teeth parted in a grin as it tore through dirt, kicking up a small cyclone in its wake. Finally, when he felt satisfied, he finished the combo, Aura, and whipped his newfound weapon forward. His new Gnosis sang and wind burst free with a cry to strike a nearby tree, and the one behind it, then the one behind that. 3 might oaks evaporated in a shower of splinters, showering him and Paimon with bark and sap alike. Tui! Paimon coughed and dusted herself off. Then she saw the ruin he'd wrought and gulped. Okay, yikes. Paimon didn't know you were that strong. Naruto winced at the massacre he'd made. Oops. Got a little carried away. Kurama groaned into a paw. Oops, he says. Well, Naruto hastily reassured himself, it was just a few trees. He doubted anyone would notice. From there he bound the polearm to his back, only to find it hardly weighed anything at all. Strange. Still, it benefited him, so he wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. Speaking of gifts, he wasn't sure he liked the look Paimon was giving him. That one was free. He cast a cheeky grin Paimon's way, noting her pallid expression. I'll charge you for the show next time. His remark snapped her back to reality and she huffed. Meanie. Geez, she really did remind him of a small child sometimes. Maybe that was why he tolerated her, and teased her. He supposed that was part of her charm. She certainly wasn't emergency food or anything. No, certainly not. How could anyone think such a cruel thing? Besides, she grumbled, Paimon can't fight and you can, so? I know, just pulling your leg. He tried to rustle her hair again, only to laugh even harder when she darted out of the way. See if you can't rustle up a few more chests before we get to, what was it called again? Mondstadt, she admonished, poking his shoulder with a tiny finger. Geez, for an Anemo Archon you really don't know much of the city you're meant to watch over, don't tell me you're a slacker. Right, that. Naruto snapped his fingers. Also, not doing what you said, hey. It was no use, she was already darting on ahead, forcing him to trot after her. Slow down. She whirled back and stuck out her tongue. But you're so slow. Naruto twitched a little. Slow, was he? How little she knew, he'd have to surprise her later. And don't go diving into a pack of hillchurls if you see them guarding a chest, he shouted after her. Wait until I clear the baddies out first, yeah? She whirled back to face him as she flew and tented her fingers. Well, you made mincemeat of the last bunch. His brow furrowed. Paimon. Meep. She gave a startled chirrup and waited for him to catch up. Yes, sir. Naruto let his mind wander as they walked. At least their money problems were solved for the foreseeable future. But really, who left loot out in the wilderness? That was just asking for trouble. He supposed the loot could have belonged to those creatures, but that was just unlikely. What need had monsters of Mora? And if it was theirs, why leave it out where anyone could stumble upon it? Really? Who did that? Idiots? Imbeciles? Game designers? On a whim, Naruto pulled another, smaller pouch from a storage scroll, this one taken from another such raid today. Deft fingers undid the drawstring and appraised it most intently. Unlike the last bag Paimon had given him, here were strange shiny gems scattered among the golden coins. More than he could count. Interlocked lines of rainbow-esque light teased his eyes, begging to be touched, promising something wondrous if he did. Almost like a wish. Naruto considered them for a moment, then bound them back to his belt. Probably not important, but he'd err on the side of caution for this journey. Shaking his head, he favored his traveling companion with a wry look. There was another matter that had been nagging at him for the better part of the day now. "So, Paimon," he said apropos of nothing, "tell me about yourself." She whirled around in the air to face him as they trekked up a grassy knoll, still maintaining her forward momentum somehow. "Paimon is Paimon. Too cute. Must protect." "You certainly are," Naruto hedged, "but I was hoping to get to know you a little better. If I hadn't fished you out of the water, you'd still be there, you know?" A faint bit of color hit the fairy's cheeks. Her mouth opened. Closed again. "Ha!" She touched a finger to chin. "Now that you mention it, Paimon doesn't really remember much about herself. Curious. So you've got amnesia?" She huffed and kicked out at his shoulder. "Don't be a meanie." Wasn't being mean, he took the weak blow with a laugh. "Just curious." He let Paimon prattle on and turned his attention elsewhere. He could still feel the gnosis in his chest again, pulsing like a second heartbeat. "Any luck getting this thing out of my chest?" Easier said than done. Kurama's retort proved almost waspish. "It's in there pretty deep." His lips pursed into a thin line. "Is it, I dunno, doing anything?" "Not that I can tell, bar our little flare-ups. Say what you will about this gnosis thing, but it's made us more powerful." Naruto flung out a hand and the wind stirred. "Seems like it. Might have to experiment a bit, irk." A faint tingling build in the back of his head the moment throttled it back. Not this again. Paimon saw it at once. No. Resist. Hold it in." Naruto wrinkled his nose and reared back. "I can't, ACHOO. Amber considered herself a good knight. Superb, even." She was quick on her feet, a fair shot with her trusty bow, and there was no one better when it came to wiping out camps of hilichurls. That was her given task today, eradicating a camp that had cropped up too close to the city. All said, she had fought and studied and trained hard to be a knight. None of her training could have prepared her for this. Achoo! A sudden sneeze echoed somewhere in the distance behind her, deep within the wilds. That was her only warning. Amber whirled to face it with a frown. Then all hell broke loose. With mighty wail the wind sprang to life, clouds sweeping in to darken the sky. There was no transition between one moment and the next. She scarcely had time to blink before the wind swept her off her feet. She hurtled into the air with a yelp, cast aloft like some errant leaf. What in the world? Panic bleated through her thoughts. Alas, her startled shriek was snatched up by the winds, leaving her to tumble end over end. Glider, her mind flailed. Gotta deploy my glider, or I'm done for. But it was no use, the wind ripped it from her grasp and dashed her wings. She could no sooner tell up from down than she could left from right. And then, quite suddenly, the storm abated. With neither word nor warning the forces holding her aloft dissipated. For a single moment she hung there in the air. Then the world took hold, sending her hurtling to the earth below. She spied a lake beneath her and winced, because there on the shores of said lake, was that a person? No. She was going to crash. She flailed in the air, to no avail. "Look oud below." The bystander looked up, eyes gone wide. Amber had all of an instant to admire them. Beautiful bright golden eyes, framed by an untamed mess of flaxen hair. A discarded fishing rod lay at their feet, forgotten now as the stranger tried to catch her. She really did try. She just failed spectacularly. Amber crashed headlong into her. They went sprawling head over heels into the lake. Poor Lumen. Her time in Teyvat would be memorable if nothing else. But that's a story for another time. Every nation felt it. Indeed, how could they not? From bustling Liyue to isolate Inazuma, frigid Snezhnaya, and beyond. Each and every archon and one former noticed the sudden outburst of energy. Venti regarded the rapidly darkening horizon from a distant hill. Oops, a grimace touched the pale visage of the former god, now merely a humble bard once more. That looks unpleasant. Maybe I should have given him some lessons before I ran off. A beat of silence passed as he considered the raging windstorm, as he heard the distant shout of incredulity. Nah, he thumbed his nose. He'll figure things out, I'm sure of it. Shouldering his knapsack, he continued on his journey. Zhongli looked up into the clear, cloudless sky and savored his wine. A faint smile creased his face. And so a new chapter begins. It seemed they had a new addition to their ranks. The Raiden Shogun rose from her throne. Exceptions, the enemy of eternity. Time to accelerate her plans. For crying out loud? Naruto winced, regarding the raging windstorm he'd inadvertently summoned in the distance. He could hear the wind howling from here, even now he couldn't help but grimace as he watched the squall spend its fury. It would burn out quickly, his flare UPS always did, but the chagrin of losing control remained all the same. Trying to control it like this was impossible. He could only stare at it and hope it would fade before it hurt anyone. Because really, who would be out here in the wilds? Kurama groaned. You're impossible sometimes. A bead of sweat ran down his brow. Think anyone noticed? Paimon tended her fingers, looked away, and tittered nervously. Ehehe. Naruto rounded on her, a muscle jumping in his jaw to pound alongside the vein his temple. What do you mean, eh hey? Why you? A sudden gust of wind hit, all but ripping those words away. Shadow and darkness came with it, summoning a sudden swell of malice on the wind. Naruto pivoted to face it, forced to duck as something impossibly large hurtled past. His head snapped up just in time to behold the source, a might azure creature bearing 4 limbs and burgeoned by 2 massive wings, alongside a flowing tail. Its claws were sharp, its eyes dark with anger that bubbled just beneath the surface, its maw gaping wide. There could only be one classification for such a creature. Not lizard, not a wyvern, and certainly not a newt. No, it could only be a. Paimon beat him to it by a country mile. That is one Baiig dragon. Bah! We've seen bigger. They had indeed. The 10 tails made this admittedly majestic creature look puny by comparison. Still as he looked on, the mighty beast winged down and alighted upon the field before them. The ground quaked with his passing, the sheer power of its wings nearly blew Paimon away. Without looking back he reached out and caught her by the ankle, reeling her in as one might a fish. She plunked down onto his shoulders and latched onto his hair, clinging on for dear life. And then said beast parted its jaws. You are not Barbatos. Its voice was a low churning storm, one in whose eye they stood. Where is he? Well, a talking dragon. Naruto whistled. That's new. Wait. Paimon tugged at his hair. You can understand him? Yup, he waved a hand from side to side. I've dealt with talking summons before. Some even larger than this guy. Granted, none were a freaking dragon, but beggars couldn't be choosers. Meh. Kurama opined. I can take him. Just say the word. As he gazed up at the winged terror, something in his chest, Venti's gnosis, sang at the sight of this great blue beast. Friend, it seemed to whisper in his ear. He craned an ear and the voice grew still louder in his head. Friend. Dvalin. One of the 4 winds. Ally. Be kind. Naruto nearly recoiled. This thing was Dvalin. And yet, there was something decidedly off about this dreadful dragon. Negativity hung over him like a cloud to be sure, but there was another source that pressed at his sense. His gaze soon found the source. What were those 2 vicious spikes on its back? 2 ghastly black spires stood in stark contrast to its teal scales, one lay between his wings, while the other lurked near his neck. They radiated malice, while the dragon before him felt weary. Tired. Stricken with pain. He flung his senses at the eerie thorns and winced at what he found there. Whatever those things were, they didn't feel natural. Tainted. That was the word. His marked palm itched, aching to remove them. Hey there, buddy, he began slowly, are you feeling all right? Do not test my patience, stranger, the beast growled in return. Speak. Who are you? What have you done with Barbatos? Well, if it's names you're after, I'm Naruto. He swept a hand up to the fretful fairy still perched on his shoulders like a child. This here's Paimon. Say hello to the dragon, Paimon. Nice dragon, Paimon managed through chattering teeth. Good dragon, please don't make a snack out of Paimon? Dvalin snapped his jaws at her and she flitted back behind Naruto's shoulders with a yelp. Not a nice dragon. And you must be Dvalin, he finished with a sigh. Just like that the dragon forgot all about Paimon, with the mention of his name and much to Naruto's chagrin, Dvalin only had eyes for him now. Mighty claws dug deep into the loamy soil, tearing great gouges into the dirt. He didn't much relish the idea of being caught by those. I sense his power from you. Has he sent you in his stead? And how do you know my name? Hey! His lips pursed in a frown. Nobody sent me to do anything. As for the last bit, said frown deepened, it's a bit of a long story. Paimon swooped in like the little guardian angel she was. Basically, she clasped both hands behind her back. He met this crazy guy in green guy and got his power, her head tilted just so. Maybe that's why he feels so familiar to you? A tentative smile plucked at her pale face. After all, he's the new Archon. The silence that followed was nothing short of ominous. Dvalin suddenly seemed to loom large over them. I beg your pardon? Poor choice of words there, partner. Naruto hissed through his teeth, never once taking his eyes from the corrupted creature before them. Very poor? Huh? She looked to him in blissful naivete, not quite comprehending the magnitude of her blunder at first. And then, oh! Realization dawned in her starry eyes a moment later and she pivoted in the air to face a now snarling Dvalin. No. Paimon didn't mean it like that. Too little, too late. High above, the skies began to darken. Wind swept in, ripping leaves from trees. Dvalin reared back, towering in his fury. Murderer! Wait a second. Naruto flung up a palm. This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't ask for this power. That damn bard gave it to me. Liar. Dvalin raked a claw through the air, forcing him to retreat or risk grievous injury. Deceiver. You hold his gnosis within you. If you won't tell the truth, then I'll destroy the city you seek to rule. You shall have nothing of his, even if I must destroy it myself. What kind of twisted logic was that? Kurama stirred. The logic of a poor soul twisted and corrupted by misery. With a yowl, Dvalin took wing. Naruto leaped up after him and latched onto his tail. Behind him, he heard Paimon's terrified yelp. What are you doing? The blonde cast a glance backward. Follow if you can. Wind swallowed her cry as both man and beast hurtled into the sky. Perhaps Dvalin was faster than they looked, or mayhaps Mondstadt was simply closer than it appeared. Whatever the case, their tussle carried them upward into the clouds for all of a minute before Naruto found a proper handhold. The very moment he did, he unleashed Kurama. Gravity, and the sheer weight of his partner did the rest. A giant fox smote the raging dragon from the sky and rode it to the ground. They crashed down in the city plaza like a meteor from on high. From a distance, Naruto heard shouts and screams, but he was too focused on the conflict to think of anything else. Kurama pinned Dvalin's wings, and that was the end of their flight. Without the gift of his wings, the enraged dragon had nowhere to go but through him. 9 tails of purest light slammed into the dragon's limbs as he wrestled it to the ground. Calm down, ya damn dragon. I know you're upset, but you've got it all wrong. Hear me out. Artifice. Listen to me. Naruto grit his teeth as they grappled. I didn't kill your friend. That tone-deaf bard is alive and well. Dvalin's long neck twisted around and bit out at a golden arm, for all the good it did. One could not harm a body of pure chakra, much less poison it with tainted blood. His tail flicked out, tripping him for all of a moment, then he buelled back in and rammed him through a building. This time there could be no ignoring the bystanders, or the damage he'd wrought. Will you just listen for a second? Never. What do you know of my loneliness? Claws raked and tore at him, to no avail. When have you been cast in the dark and left to rot? You know nothing of my pain. I know exactly what it feels like. Fiery breath bathed his face, causing Kurama to recoil. I've been where you are now. I've lived it. I know it hurts. A mighty fist caught the dragon in the jaw to cut his breath short and sending sharp teeth whistling through the air. I know you want to scream. But you can't let this beat you. So you can't find your friend. When the enraged beast tried to rise, he headbutt him for his trouble. Make new ones. So you lost your reason to live. Find a new one. That's what I did. Naruto's gaze fixed on the twisted spires jutting from Dvalin's back. Don't take it out on everyone else. A wordless roar answered him. His eyes narrowed. Those weird spikes have something to do with this. I just know it. In an instant he zipped out of Kurama and alighted upon the dragon's back. Dvalin cursed him, said curse turned into a yowl of pain as he snapped off first spire of tainted blood, followed soon thereafter by the second in its wake. He whirled pressed his marked palm to nearest wound. Chakra raged at it, cooling the corruption there, drawing it out like poison from a wound. In that moment, the gems in his pouch pulsed with power. Naruto cast a wild glance at them. For the lovey of? What now? Blinding light burned the world white, and Dvalin's bulk shifted beneath him, denying him the balance he sought. Unable to course correct in time, he toppled forward with cursed and struggled to blinking spots away. His hands grasped something and he heard a pitched contralto of a growl. Eh? His vision cleared a moment later and he found himself face to face not with a dragon, but a young woman, more a girl really, in late adolescence. His eyes were startled slits of glowing sky blue, her hair a rich teal. Faint scales etched her face and arms, but most importantly, she hadn't so much as a stitch of clothing to her name. The girl looked at the position of his hand. Frowned. Naruto frowned right back at her. Wide eyes widened further still. She looked down at her fragile, human form and made a noise that sounded like a hiss. At least he thought it was meant to sound like one. Instead, the noise that emerged was the sweetest of music. That only seemed to outrage her yet further. "What have you done?" The sound of her own voice seemed to surprise her, for her hands flew to her face. "My wings? My claws? Where are they?" she flailed, kicking at him to no avail. "Unfair!" she cried. "This is unfair. I don't know how to fight like this." Naruto blinked. Once. Twice. Thrice. Now. "Dvalin?" She absolutely snarled at him. "Who else? Change me back this instant." Brat?" Kurama coughed. "Might want to move your hand. Preferably now." Heat suffused Naruto's cheeks and he retreated, taking his palm from her breast. He all but flung his jacket at her, if only to preserve her modesty. "Ahem?" Someone coughed behind him. Only then did he notice the ring of steel surrounding them. Blast. How had he missed that? He stood slowly, somewhat alarmed to find a host of unfamiliar faces staring back at him. Many of which held weapons in their hands. That said weapons were mostly pointed at him went without saying. "All right," he temporized with raised palms, "I know what this looks like, but I can explain. This is just one big misunderstanding." Dvalin made angry Dvalin noises behind him, clutching his jacket close to herself as she keened furiously. "All right," he amended. "That, I can't explain. She was a dragon a second ago, I swear." Everyone looked to the startled young woman. Back to him. To Dvalin once more. "I have just one question." A man with an eye patch took the initiative and stepped forth. "Who in the world are? Where's the dragon?" Someone cried, cutting him off. "Quick, blow it up." Boom! Something sailed through the air, struck Naruto's back and exploded with all the force of a bomb. Fire rained. Smoke flared. It didn't so much hurt as it did sting, but the impact alone sent him stumbling forward nonetheless. Kurama muttered something less than pleasant, but he could scarcely hear him over the ringing in his ears. Naruto coughed once. "Ow! Oh, no," someone wailed. "I hit a person by mistake." At this point, the poor Jinchuriki wanted to cry. Would the madness never end? Stifling a groan, Naruto whirled and beheld the culprit, a young girl bearing pale hair alongside strange curved ears. Red eyes fixed on his, wide and startled, her arms still overextended from throwing whatever it was that hit him. Her expression became decidedly sheepish as his gaze pinned her. "Glee, no!" he heard someone shout in the background. "Bad girl. Glee's done for," the culprit wailed with teary eyes. "I broke the rules." "Whoa, hey!" He flailed his arms, startled by her outburst. "It's fine. You didn't hurt me." She sniffled. "I didn't? But Uncle Kia just said?" "No," Naruto temporized with a raised hand, "you didn't hurt me. See?" His arms pinwheeled anew. "Not a scratch." Ruby red eyes gazed up at him. "Promise?" "Irk." Naruto's heart twitched. Yeah, he looked away, clutching at his heart. "Sure. I'm alright." "Okay." She peered past his legs. "Do you know where the dragon went?" Dvalin made angry noises anew. Naruto palmed his face. "That's her. Not my fault." The strange child blinked. Why is the dragon a person? Finally. Someone asking the real questions. How in blazes did this happen? Alright, not missing a beat, the man with the eye patch sheathed his sword. Why don't we follow Klee's example and just calm down? His visible eye squinted at Dvalin's quivering form. Right. He stifled a sigh with the back of his palm. At least until Jean gets here. Oddly enough, the chaos sliced through the tension. It gave Naruto time to mumble an assent and step back, to see, to think. The weapons facing him lowered, allowing him to take in each of their faces in turn. Their appearances ranged from odd to outright eclectic in some cases. He beheld one in particular, a brunette clad in striking purple with grassy green eyes. Well. Her gaze held his like lightning. She looked him up. Looked him down. Smiled. "Aren't you a cutie?" "Wait, what? Cutie?" Naruto couldn't help but gulp a little at that remark. Why is she calling me that? And why do I have a bad feeling about this? How little he knew. And that's how we got here. Paimon planted two tiny fists on her hips, lifted her chin just so and preened, hovering but a little as she finished regaling them with the tale. None dared to interject. More than a few gaped. Others stared. Silence reigned supreme and none dared to defy nor deny what she'd just said. In hindsight, Naruto really couldn't blame them. Not after what they'd witnessed. Ensconced in the headquarters of the Knights of Favonius, and wasn't that a mouthful? The wayward warrior found himself seated in a worn oak chair before a young woman and likewise surrounded by a colorful cast of characters. Somehow that cheery red Bernie girl, Klee, had wound up in his lap, balanced upon one knee like the child she was. Even now she hummed happily to herself as she fiddled with a tiny red sphere. It probably wasn't a bomb, but he wasn't about to ask. At least she wasn't looking at him like he'd grown a second head. Right. Naruto slapped his own when no one dared speak. Embellishment aside, that's the long and short of it. I'm not here to cause trouble. Yup, his travel guide chirruped in agreement, clasping both palms behind her back. We come in peace. Peace, she says. The man with the eye patch tooted softly. Funny way of showing it. Hey. Paimon wasn't kidding. I see. Behind her desk, acting Grand Master Jean steeped her fingers and laid her chin atop them. Then you're not Lord Barbatos? When he didn't immediately reply, she dared to press the issue. I wasn't there to see your fight with Dvalin personally, but from what I've heard. Kia whistled innocently. Paimon poked her fingers together. Well, yeah. A muscle jumped in the Jinchuriki's jaw, throbbing alongside a vein his temple. No, he pinched the bridge of his nose in a vain attempt to stave off an oncoming migraine. No, and also, no. That bit with Dvalin was an accident. And he still had to figure out why those gems in his pouch had done whatever they did. Don't call me Barbatos. Ever. Now that he knew what that name meant, as well as all the awful responsibility that it entailed, he wasn't all that fond of Venti's real name. I ain't a god. There. Paimon patted his shoulder to soothe him. Paimon believes you. Lies. You called me a god earlier. Naruto resisted the urge to roll his eyes. He was lucky she'd managed to find him after that wild flight. Unfortunately she'd only made the misunderstanding even worse. He didn't doubt her words, but after that display in the town square, he expected most of Mondstadt would be singing his praises before morning. Might be best to move on before then. Belief was all well and good, but he didn't relish the idea of being revered for something he wasn't, or worse, feared. Kurama huffed and laid down in the seal. Welcome to my world? By the way. Paimon put in suddenly, startling him out of his reverie. Paimon wants to throttle that tone-deaf bard. He started all this. Kia guffawed. Jean choked on her own spit. Klee touched a finger to her lips. Tone-deaf bard? Exactly. The little fairy rounded on her, wagging one finger from side to side with intent. He sounds like an awful guy, so naturally, Paimon gave him an equally awful nickname. She crossed both arms before her chest, smugly satisfied. Let's see how he likes that. Her brow furrowed as only a child's could. Mr. Bard's a bad person? Paimon's smile was decidedly impish. The worst. You should blow him up. MMK. Kurama snorted. Fiery little fairy. Can we keep her? Jean found her voice at last. Glee, no. Naruto stifled a snort behind his palm. Just like that, he felt the ghost of a smile grace his weary whiskers. Say what you would about Paimon and her love for all things Mora, but she certainly had a way of lightening the mood. Coupled with Keel being well, Klee, he already felt his spirits rising. And besides, unlike Paimon, Klee didn't mind headpats. She didn't dodge them at the very least. I'll be sure to call him that the next time I see him, he said at length. Right before I kick him in the balls. Jean made flustered Jean noises anew. You can't just kick a god. Naruto squinted. Gonna do it again. Still, we only have your words to go on. Devil's advocate as always, Kia. How do we know he's telling the truth? Paimon winced. Whoa. Naruto bridled. No. They were not doing this to him. Absolutely not. Open your eyes. There's a statue to the guy in the middle of the city square. He flung up his arms with an aggravated cry. I look nothing like him. Not a damn thing. Jean thumbed her chin and considered the matter further. In the legends, the gods have been known to change their appearance as their mood suits. Well, I can use transformation jutsu no. That's beside the point. See? Kei's smile was nothing short of smug. There could be no doubt he'd done it deliberately. I'm afraid you'd be able to fool us quite that easily. That said, Barbara's going to have a fit. The dandelion knight groaned into her palm. Please don't remind me. Oi! I'm talking. Naruto felt something pop in his already clenched jaw. It felt like a tooth. Kia! Why that no good Sanuva? He knew exactly what he was doing. Was this his punishment for wrecking the square? Forget what he'd said about no violence earlier, he wanted to wring the scrawny bastard's neck. Paimon rounded on him before he could. You be quiet, Mr. Eyepatch. Kia recoiled, touching a hand to his face. Eyepatch? Klee giggled merrily. Uncle Eyepatch. Just like that, the faint tremor of a tiny smile nearly betrayed Naruto all over again. Blast these girls. He wanted to be angry, but with them around it was almost impossible to hold on to his anger. You took down Dvalin with your bare hands. Leave it to Jean to push the matter at hand. Who else can do such but a god? Naruto frowned. Speaking of which, where is that grumpy lizard? She's with Lisa and... As though summoned by those very words, the door leading to Jean's office flew forth from its hinges. A new figure crashed through the archway in a swirl of cerulean silk. They dragged the stunned figure of a young man behind them at great sufferance and dropped him at their feet. An accusing finger stabbed forth at the acting Grand Master. Your knight wouldn't stop poking me. Klee blinked down at the prone figure and waved from Naruto's lap. Hello, big brother Albedo. The young man waved a weary arm. Hello, Klee. Naruto ignored them both. Dvalin? It took him a moment to recognize the transformed dragoness. Her long flowing hair had been found into a braid over her shoulder, contrasting nicely with her deep blue horns. Likewise, someone had stuffed her into a flowing dress of lovely azure silk and she did not look happy about it. Not in the least. Even now she scowled at her hands. My mind is clear, but what is this feeble form? I told Albedo not to pry, but he just kept poking her. A new voice chimed as Lisa waltzed, hip swinging. Now, she said to Dvalin, you look lovely. She bared her teeth. I feel like a fool. Naruto coughed into a fist. It was a mistake. Everyone noticed. Lisa saw him and waved. Hello again, sweetie. You look well. Dvalin's reaction was, decidedly less pleasant. There you are. Slittled eyes focused on him. Change me back this instant. He shrugged. I would if I could. Do you think I planned this? Yes. Her head butted against his. False god. Oi. Enough of this. She brandished her hands like claws. If you won't change me back I'll make. Paimonial wrath. The hybrid slumped to the floor, eyes rolling up in their head. Naruto frowned, and leaned past her to behold the culprit. Really? That's what you're calling it? The little sprite waved the heavy tome about and stomped a foot in the air. Paimon's trying, all right? She was going to attack you. Sure enough, Dvalin stirred on the floor. I will have my revenge. Lisa stalked over to her, slapped a vial of pale blue liquid against the woman's lips and tipped her head back, pinching the hybrid's nose in the same instant. Dvalin made an angry noise but stunned as she was, her body betrayed her. She swallowed instinctively. Her eyes rolled up in her head and she slumped in the magician's arms. Kia whistled. Klee applauded politely. There we go, the magician lowered her gently back onto the thick rug. I've dosed her with a sleeping draught mixed with a calming potion. She should be a bit more herself once she wakes. Albedo, be a dear and take her somewhere more comfortable, won't you? One of the guest rooms will do. The man known only as Albedo dragged himself upright with a groan. Yes, I'll get right on that. Curious eyes alighted upon Naruto. His head tilted a fraction to the right. Fascinating, he murmured. See? Kia ribbed him the moment he was gone. She called you a false god. Naruto's smile was all teeth. Wanna say that again, Eyepatch? Must you call me that? Depends. You gonna keep calling me an Archon? Paimon hefted her borrowed tome. Maybe Paimon should use this again. Alright, you win. The knight raised his hands to ward her off. I've had my fun. Naruto coughed into a fist. It was high time he cleared the air. Look, he began warily, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea, here. I'll be out of your hair as soon as I've gotten a good rest. He remembered Dvalin and a spot of high color hit his cheeks. And changed her back. There's no need to fuss over me like this. His words did not have the desired effect. You can't leave. Naruto's gaze snapped down with a start. He suddenly remembered Klee was still sitting in his lap. She'd been on her best behavior, so much so that he'd nearly forgotten about her altogether. Not anymore. Earnest red eyes gazed up at him, shimmering with tears. Now she grabbed at his hand. We were supposed to go fish blasting. Is that so? Jean's voice turned eerily calm. When he looked up her smile was a brittle thing indeed. First I've heard of it. Klee squeaked and squirmed in his lap. Meep. I'm afraid she's right. Kia's words were a hammer blow to his confidence. Leaving is a bit more complicated than you realize. Called it. Kurama opined. Naruto bit his tongue to stifle a curse. And why is that? To put it bluntly, too many have seen you, including those of the Fatui embassy. When the blonde scowled at him, the icy knight stood his ground. It's going to be all but impossible to suppress word of mouth. They're already asking questions. Yeesh. Paimon winced a little. Can't those guys take a hint? I can defend myself. Naruto put in, not at all liking where this was going. I really don't need your protection. No one's denying that, Lisa temporized with a raised hand, but there's strength in numbers. If you just stay for a few days, let the people see you. And let them start worshipping him? Out of the question. He could see why Venti wanted to be rid of his gnosis and powers aside. They were nothing but trouble. Are you deaf? A rare bite of anger pushed itself into his voice. I said no. Jean rose from her chair. I'm afraid we must insist. Kia reached for his sword. Paimon yelped and flitted behind him. Kia. Lisa hissed, put your weapon down. Oh, you insist? Too little, too late. Naruto's temper finally stirred. Well, in that case? With a mournful cry, the wind responded to his anger and hearkened to him. Slowly at first, lifting his hair just so. I'm afraid I must insist as well. He gave Klee a little nudge, causing her to hop off his lap. Go to Jean. She dithered. But. Go on. Her planted a hand between her little shoulders and nudged her forward. I'll be fine. He waited until she scurried away before acting further. Without fear of harming her, the wind built in earnest. Within a matter of moments it began to pick up speed. Papers flew into the air. Books were ripped from their shelves. Kia stumbled back as one buffeted him about the head. Lisa drew back, seeking the shelter of the doorway, even as Jean balked. All the while the gnosis in Naruto's chest sang like a star. You can't stop me, he rumbled. If I want to leave, I'm leaving. Although he couldn't see his reflection, had he glimpsed his eyes, he would have been most startled. They burned bright, a startling shade of viridian, almost like that of a certain barred bastard. Paimon saw them and cooed a little, even as the others recoiled. Naruto paid them no mind, his ire was focused firmly elsewhere. You think defeating Dvalin was impressive? His voice rose, booming over the great gale. I've done things you can't even begin to imagine, faced foes that would give you nightmares. Those words warped into a snarl as he recalled his greatest foe, his greatest failure of all. And you think you can keep me here against my will? He raised a hand, glowing gold with Kurama's chakra. Any of you want to try your luck? No one budged. Good, he dropped the wind tunnel with a sigh, releasing his chakra alike. Now, I'm going to walk out that door and find somewhere to shack up for the night. No one dared to say otherwise. You want to help with that? Be my guest. Otherwise? He turned his back on them without so much as a second thought. A shimmering eye shone over his shoulder. Leave me alone. Amber came trotting in not a minute later, her new friend in tow. Grand Master Jean. I found. She took one look at the frazzled faces and the utter disarray of Jean's office. Then she blinked. Once. Twice. Thrice now. What did I miss? Jean's head struck her desk. This is not my day. .0.0.0. Wait a moment. Naruto stifled a sigh as someone called out to him in the street. Nope. Ignore. Suppress. Don't rise to the bait. He kept walking, even as Paimon paused to glance back at the new arrival. When he didn't slow, she darted back to hover beside him, face wrought with worry. Are you sure you want to do that? Her whisper tickled his ear. Paimon thinks this is all one big misunderstanding. Naruto nearly snapped at her for her concern. He would have too, if his conscience hadn't whispered in his ear. Paimon didn't deserve his wrath. She'd been nothing but helpful to him thus far. He narrowly restrained himself at the last instant and settled for a quick nod instead. It's not your fault. He reached around absently to pat her head. I'm just tired. She didn't dodge this time. That alone showed her concern. Maybe some good food would help? He opened his mouth to say otherwise. The moment he did, his stomach offered a weak whine of protest. Right, he'd promised her a meal, hadn't he? Maybe some proper food would set him to rights. He was feeling a little hangry right now anyway. I did promise you a meal, didn't I? Starry eyes lit up as his little guide squealed happily. You remembered. One couldn't fake the sheer surge of glee that emanated from her in that moment. Of course I did. Naruto muttered. Now come on, there's gotta be a place to get some grub around here. Something, or someone, snagged his sleeve before he could indulge, jerking him backward. Oh, for the love of, he rounded on them with a snarl, and Paimon proved just as quick to flit out of his way. What is it this time? In short order he found himself facing a familiar figure, hunched over, yet still clinging at his sleeve for dear life. Their fingers held firm, even as he tried to wrest his arm away. Making me exert myself, they huffed a little as they straightened and planted a gloved hand on their hip. Don't you know it's rude to make a lady chase after you? Blue eyes narrowed, sparking with a hint of balefire. It's also rude to follow someone when they want to be left alone. Easy, now, she took her hand away, raised her palms to show herself harmless. I come in peace. Naruto and Paimon exchanged a bland look between themselves. The latter shrugged. Paimon thinks she's a nice person. The purple lady smiled, quite pleased by that remark. I am. You should listen to your friend. Naruto scowled. Get to the point. As you wish. As he looked on, she feigned a curtsy and bowed her head low. I wanted to apologize for the fiasco back there. Then she touched a hand to her bosom. My name is Lisa, he finished, crossing both arms before his ruined jacket. I remember. It, and the manner of their first meeting, had stuck with him despite everything else thus far. Dense or no, one does simply not forget when a woman looks at you like a fine cut of steak and licks their lips. And you already know my name? Judging by the way her eyes brightened, it was the right thing to say. I'm flattered. Well, he wasn't about to admit Jean had told him. He'd never live it down. Look, he ran a hand through his hair as he sighed. I've had a bit of a day and I'm not in the best of moods at the moment. Did you need something? I'd like to apologize for that, too. Lisa clasped both hands behind her back and leaned forward just so. It did interesting things to her bosom. You've had a difficult time since you came to our fair city, and we haven't shown you our best side. Those grass-green eyes twinkled suddenly. I think a walk is just what you need to settle your mind. Kurama chuckled. Bold woman. Paimon quirked a snow-white brow. Huh? Naruto mirrored her. Magician say what now? A walk, dear. Lisa clapped her hands together gently, holding them up before her face. I was just on my way to visit a student of mine, Wolvendom. Before he could hope to get a word in edgewise, she offered him her hand, palm extended just so. Be a dear and accompany me, won't you? Naruto's brow shot into his hairline. Really not in the mood for another walk at the moment. Lisa took it in stride, bless her. All right, I'll bite, she all but cooed the words. Where are you headed? Paimon wriggled in the air in thinly veiled anticipation. Well, we were hoping to get something to eat. Lovely. Lisa didn't waver in the least. I can recommend a place, she raised a finger, conjuring a purple rose above it. Good hunter's cuisine is to die for. Naruto frowned. Was this what he thought it was? No, surely not. He'd be the first to admit he didn't wholly understand women sometimes, but surely someone couldn't be this forward. It just wasn't possible, was it? Is this what I think it is? She let the rose wither away. Depends what you think it is. A date. A spark danced in those lively green eyes. And if it is? He planted his feet, refusing to budge. We barely know one another. Then this is the perfect chance to do just that, she flashed him a wink. First come, first serve and all that. Naruto flicked a baffled look at his partner in crime. She shook her head vehemently and floated away, arms flailing like twin pinwheels in the wind. Oh, but I'm hardly the selfish sort, Minyu. Lisa was all too quick to amend her statement, no doubt mistaking his silence for anger. I don't mind sharing. You're a god after all, no matter what you might say. You can't fool me. She touched two fingers to her lips and blew him a kiss. Tempting as it is, I could hardly hope to keep you to myself. Naruto choked. What the hell's going on? Kurama laughed at his plight. And here I thought you were mad. Thankfully, poor Paimon came to his rescue. She'd held her tongue until now, but those last words drew a confused squeak from her. Ah! All that went right over Paimon's head. She looked between them, eyes spinning. Are we getting something to eat or? Lisa flicked her a sympathetic look. Don't worry, darling, she patted her snowy hair. You're more than welcome to tag along. Paimon giggled and leaned in like a cat. Naruto bridled. Traitor. So? Quick as lightning the lady magician pulled her hand away and pivoted to face him. What do you say? She planted one hand on her hip, cocking her body to the right. Gah! Stop looking at her hips. We're both adults here. I'll understand if you're not interested, but I'd prefer you were upfront about it. Naruto blanked. Once, he would have sputtered and stammered, shouting like a foolish boy. But after the sheer madness he'd endured for the last few days? He'd been made an archon, wandered the wilds with a treasure-loving fairy, grappled with a dragon, and somehow turned said dragon into one very angry girl. A girl with draconic powers, for crying out loud. And now the one city he'd come to wanted to keep him as some sort of figurehead to be worshipped. Compared to all that, a date was almost blessedly normal by comparison. He'd kill for a little normal right now. Emphasis on a little. And he was starving? A small hand patted his shoulder. Paimon says go for it. What, really? Naruto's head snapped to the right. He physically felt his neck creak. You think I should? Yup. Her head bobbed as she rubbed her hands together. Besides, if she's paying for lunch, then we can save our morale. She jolted a little as a spark shot through the air and struck her backside. Did you see that? Her little form whirled, seeking the source and finding none. Something just zapped Paimon. Is it the weather or? Lisa hid a smoking finger behind her back. Well? Screw it, he shrugged. You know what? I think that sounds great. Lead on. Lisa's smile was lovely as lightning and only a little less shocking than love at first sight. It lit up her face like electroglow. He felt his heart skip a beat before he mastered it. Shall we, then? Her voice hummed with a soft contralto, laughter narrowly suppressed. I do hope you're not afraid of witches. He didn't bother to hide his scoff. A witch? Was that the best she had? I've seen scarier. She eyed him for a long moment, considering him as one might a fine cut of meat. He wasn't sure it was apt comparison, but her gaze certainly threatened to devour him. He met hers in turn and didn't waver. You really have, haven't you? Quick as a flash, she darted forward and looped an arm in his. I like a man who can back up his words. Naruto felt his face burn. You're absolutely impossible, you know that? So I've been told. Lisa's smile was pure sin. It's one of my many redeeming qualities. This way, dear Archon, she beckoned on ahead. Allow me to give you a tour unlike any other. Paimon puffed her cheeks out in protest. Hey! Paimon's the only tour guide he needs. Of the finest restaurants this side of Mondstadt. Lisa finished. Paimon retracts her objection. Oi, Naruto scowled at Lisa, seeing the jab for what it was. Don't call me an Archon. I ain't. Whatever you say, dear, she sashayed on with a sway in her hips. This way. Lisa didn't walk as she led him to the diner. She absolutely strutted. Morax considered the letter before him with some trepidation. It wasn't even a letter really, more a blank sheet of vellum, its words yet unwritten. Of course it was. He had yet to write them, of course. Until then, the page would remain empty. Unfulfilled. Perhaps trepidation wasn't quite the right word for what he felt in this moment. He confessed a certain anxiety about this most recent development to be sure, but there beneath the stress lurked a different sort of emotion, one he'd not experienced in quite some time. This faint pounding in his chest, the ghost of a smile on his lips, one he couldn't quite banish, no matter how hard he tried. You see, a new Archon had been born. Even younger than that tiny deity in Sumeru, they were new to their station as well as the ways of this world. Just as he'd felt the moment this fledgling first unleashed their power, so too had every Archon. No doubt this new god was quite lost and confused. The storm he'd summoned was only the first sign. If they didn't gain mastery of their newfound powers soon, they would rage out of control. Was it not his duty then, to impart some wisdom unto them while he yet could? He had plans for Liyue, but those were yet far off. He had made no deals yet, given no oath nor biting words. The contract was not yet complete, the terms still left unsealed. He could still, perhaps it was more apt to say that Zhongli considered it imperative he did. After all, if his plan went through, if his goal succeeded, then Rex Lapis would die. At least in theory. In many ways Liyue was his child, he wanted to see it flourish and grow, without him. And besides, he confessed some curiosity to the matter at hand. Had his old friend been slain? Or had he given his gnosis away willingly? If it was the latter, then there was no need for him to fret, much less intervene. But if the former held true, he would not let such an insult stand. He'd lost enough to the ravages of time. For a being who had seen all there was to see and known much of what there was to know, this was a breath of, do pardon the pun, fresh air for him. What was this new Archon like? It had been terribly long since he'd experienced something new in this dreary world. Perhaps he would travel by sea. Captain Beidou was a capable sailor. A thought plucked at him. Pursuing it, he set his quill to ink and began to write. Before long, words flowed like wine. Yes, he decided, it would be best to write this first and task someone with delivering it before Hai made his journey to the east. Experience told him a new god would likely look to expand their power base. Mondstadt had been the pride and joy of Barbados. It only stood to reason that his successor would see it out. Thus he would address this letter to the Knights of Favonius, in the hopes that they would deliver it to their new archon. Another line came and went. To you who walk among us? Zhongli hummed to himself. He rather liked that turn of phrase. Traveling by sea would certainly give his missive ample time to arrive. From there it was a simple matter to pack his things and depart the parlor. Aya? A soft voice called to him as he passed a nearby alcove. Going somewhere? He paused just over the threshold. An amber eye peered over his shoulder just in time to see a familiar pair of red eyes peering out at him from the gloom, framed by a cheery grin. The old god stifled a small smile. Ever curious this one, ever inquisitive. Such an energetic child. Then again, many in Liyue were as children to him. I intend to leave Liyue for some time. He saw no point in lying to her. I hope this won't inconvenience you, Director. What's the occasion? Hu Tao tilted her head, setting her long hair to swaying beneath her hat. Business? She steeped her fingers just so, unable to truly conceal an impish smile behind them. Or pleasure? Zhongli thumbed his chin. A bit of both, I suppose. Ooh, she clasped her hands. Another client? If he's interesting, bring him back here, won't you? I'll suggest the idea to him. If he's amenable, I'll suggest your services. The little eccentric winked. That's all I ask. Now that Zhongli considered the matter further, perhaps a trial was also in order. While the rite of dissension was still a ways off, he had no way of knowing just how long he would be gone. Mayhap he ought to put this odd newcomer through a test, just as he intended to test Liyue. The more he thought of it, the more his gnosis warmed to the idea. He'd have to disguise himself, of course, perhaps even wear another visage, however temporary. A mere trifle for him, yet an exciting one nonetheless. I had been some time since he'd worn another form, much less assumed a second identity atop his already existing ones. He was rather rusty. But no matter. He'd crossed that bridge when he came to it. Was this what excitement felt like? He'd almost forgotten the feeling. A hand waved before his face, snapping him back to reality. Zhongli. Hello? Anyone there? Golden eyes fluttered in a brief blink. I'm sorry, did you say something? It seems I was lost in thought. Excuse me, but I must be going. And don't forget to bring Mora with you this time. Her voice called after him in parting as he left the parlor behind. People won't be so kind to you outside of Liyue. Ah, yes. He'd forgotten about that. No matter. He was certain the problem would resolve itself. Eventually. In no time at all a lengthy letter was penned, sealed, and sent on its way with a most trusted messenger. Morax departed soon thereafter for the docks. Long legs carried him on a meandering route through Liyue. He took the time to savor the sights and bid his goodbyes to old friends. So passed the better part on an hour. Yet even in his fervor to depart, Rex Lapis remained ever alert. He did not fail to notice the figure that followed him. Indeed, he was perfectly aware of the shadow that stalked his every step. They kept a respectful distance and didn't approach, careful to maintain a healthy yard between the two of them at all times. They finally made themselves known once he reached the docks. Traveling abroad, are we? A jovial voice called out to him. How unlike you. Zhongli sighed. Ancient though he was unaware of the Fatui and their machinations. Indeed, there was a small part of him that tentatively supported what the Tsaritsa was trying to accomplish, even if he did dislike her methods. Still, this one seemed to bear him no ill will, for the time being. Was there something you needed, child? He turned to face the harbinger in question. Nothing in particular, no. The cheery man crossed both arms behind his head, grinning from ear to ear. But you seem excited. Zhongli blinked. Whatever makes you say that? The harbinger chuckled. Well, you're smiling, aren't you? Was he? Zhongli blinked at that, touched a hand to his lips, alarmed to find a faint smirk lurking there. His fingers trembled a little. Not from fear, but something else entirely. I suppose I am. As ever, he spoke nothing but the truth where business was concerned. If you must know, I'm off to visit a certain someone. I see. Tartaglia's smile soured. More. Business then. Forget I asked. He turned to depart. I've no interest in the affairs of the week. Come now, a thought occurred to Zhongli and on a whim, he seized upon it. I wouldn't say that. They're rather strong. Child stilled. How strong? Ah. Now he knew what this one was after. It had been some time since that storm. Time enough for the Tsaritsas will to be made known to her harbingers. Of course they would take notice. Perhaps he could use this to his advantage after all. Few in Liyue knew his true identity. Child was not one of them. But it stood to reason he would jump at the chance to fight an Archon all the same. If this new Archon was strong enough to overcome a Harbinger and protect Mondstadt in the same breath, if they were a benevolent deity who cared for their people instead of power, then they were indeed worthy of their station. If not, they would face the wrath of the rock. Stronger than you can possibly imagine. Once more, he spoke with utter honesty. They command the very wind itself. His gaze sharpened, light so bright it could cut. Interesting. Coming from you, that's high praise. Unbidden, he recalled Hu Tao's passing remark. Don't forget to bring Mora. Ah, yes. How rude. Utterly unforgivable of him to do such a thing. He couldn't very well leave without his wallet now, could he? You are welcome to accompany me if you wish. Child's once pleasant smile was all teeth. I think I'll take you up on that offer. Paimon was one happy Paimon. You see, not only was warm, safe, nearly full for the first time in ages, but right now? She could no stop laughing. No, she couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed this hard ever. Paimon can't believe you actually did something that. She doubled over to clutched at her aching sides, little legs flailing the air, physically convulsing as she fought down a giggle. And they didn't catch you? Nope. Naruto smacked his lips with audible pop and kicked one foot up onto the table while he polished off the last of his pasta. What can I say? His grin soon proved contagious. It had poor Paimon snickering all over again. Those stone faces were just begging to be painted. Would have been a crime to leave em alone, you know? Miss Lisa finished off the last of her wine with a languid sip and tilted her head, smiling softly. Such a mischievous god. Paimon agrees. Oi! His eyes narrowed. I keep telling you I'm not a god. Paimon tried to agree with that too, she really did. She just couldn't stop laughing. You had to be there to see it, I suppose. Lisa allowed with a shrug. I wish I could have seen what you looked like back then. You sounded like such a little rascal. Naruto looked left. Naruto looked right. Naruto made sure no one was in sight. Don't tell anyone I can do this. Lisa blinked. Paimon joined her. Duva! Words trailed off into a startled yelp as the blonde twisted his hands and crossed his fingers. A plume of smoke went up and when it was gone, Paimon found herself staring down at someone nearly as short as she. She had all of an instant to glimpse a cheeky grin before Lisa launched herself across the table at him. So cute, her voice rose in a delighted cry as she all but hauled the baffled blonde him into her arms. Ack, he choked and the illusion shattered, leaving his face buried in her bosom. Lemme go. Ah, the magician pouted as she did, you were so adorable, such a little troublemaker. Paimon had the strangest feeling Naruto might get along with a certain Oni. A continent away. Achoo! Arataki Ito sneezed. Huh? Somebody talkin' about me or something? The little fairy winced, eyes squinting as a bolt of pain hit her in the temple. How did she know what an Oni was? She'd never seen one before. Meh, probably not important. After all, she liked Naruto. Not like, she was much too young for that, but she enjoyed his company all the same. He asked her what she thought, didn't call her emergency food, and he treated her to all sorts of nice things. Sure, maybe he teased her a bit and he could be a bit off at times, but she could sense the gentle affection beneath his deeds. It's really not fair. Lisa tweaked his cheek, drawing a smile from Paimon. You really are the full package. The blonde bore her teasing with a patient sigh. So you've told me. It was then that Paimon knew. Naruto was a good person. Promises were important, right? Perhaps that made her simple, liking someone solely for the act of keeping their word. So what if her memory was a little fuzzy? Even if she couldn't anything about herself, she knew a whole lot about Teyvat. More than she should, really. Gods be blasted, Paimon was going to be the best darn travel guide she could for him. She could be nothing less. Paimon was Paimon, after all. Her gaze flitted to the bottle of wine. Well, she was pretty thirsty after all that food, surely a few sips wouldn't hurt? On. Lisa pushed her plate back, raised her arms over head and stretched with a softly pleased noise. All the blood rushed right to Naruto's face. It almost sounded like a moan. Had to be on purpose. No way it wasn't. She took far too long to stretch, drawing out each moment. Kurama offered a low whistle. Well, that was lovely. She touched a napkin to her face, discreetly cleaning away a tiny crumb of food near her full lips. You were a consummate gentleman today. Her smile was just short of sly as she placed a bit of mora on the table. As I said, it's my treat. Now, I think it's time to. She tried to stand, swayed in place, and fell back into her seat. Naruto and Paimon blinked. Oh. Lisa pouted. Seems I may have drunk a tad too much. Naruto felt his brow furrow. How much exactly? Well, her pale face was dusted with just a hint of pink. More than I meant to. Another attempt to rise was met with a second failure. How embarrassing. I haven't let myself go like this in a while. She sounded a little chagrined, even. I don't suppose you'd be willing to walk a lady home. A giggle escaped her lips before she could clamp down on it. I'll give you directions. She really is drunk. Kurama rolled his eyes. Not subtle at all. Naruto bit down on a sigh. He'd had a fair bit of wine himself. Who knew something so sweet could be so bad for you? And he could feel a flush in his face that had nothing to do with anxiety. Standing proved a physical effort in and of itself, but he managed through sheer willpower. Lisa, less so. He had to loop an arm around her waist to support her, and the moment he did, Lisa laughed and all but leaped into his arms. Princess Carrie. Hey! She was surprisingly light. Or perhaps he'd just gotten that strong. Thank you, she muttered against his chest. I'm feeling pretty powerless at the moment. Something in those words caught at Naruto's heart, a thorn of guilt pricking at his proverbial spirit. Powerless. Maybe she meant the words in jest, but they still stung him all the same. Even if someone is powerless, they deserve a chance. Lisa, he shifted a little, the better to balance her weight. Everyone deserves that much. The gnosis in his chest stirred a little, hearkening to that same nameless melody again. Even the weakest man out there can become strong if you just believe in him. She giggled. Sounds like you had too much to drink, same as me. Bah. Mind leading the way, Paimon? A tiny hiccup greeted his words. Naruto rounded on it. Sure enough, when he turned to face his guide, he found her floating to and fro like a leaf in the wind. Was it possible to sway in the air? She was doing a damn good job of it. Poor kiddo looked absolutely sloshed. When had she gotten into the wine? And why did he feel like a bad parent? The little fairy hiccuped. Sure thing. Just, tell Paimon where to go. Naruto rolled his eyes. Not you too. Alright, where is? He turned and bumped into someone. Aren't you a rude one, stumbling into others like that? An arch voice scoffed. Mark my words, vengeance will be mine. In an instant he glimpsed bright eyes and pale blue hair. Thanks to his somewhat blurry vision he didn't see much else. What he did see was her scowl. And was that a uniform? Why was she showing off so much leg? A beat later, her words caught up to him. Naruto blinked. But I haven't done anything? You heard her. A tipsy Paimon planted both hands on her hips and chirped the words back at Eula, slurring a little. Mark my words. Vengeance will be mine. The knight scowled. Are you mocking me? No. Naruto nabbed Paimon by the shoulder before she could make it worse. Don't mind her. We'll just be going. He turned and scarpered with both her and Lisa, refusing to acknowledge her shout. Eula stared after him. He's a strange one. Even if someone is powerless, they deserve a chance, Lisa. Everyone deserves that much. Even the weakest man out there can become strong if you just believe in him. Teppei jolted awake in his cot with a start, gasping for breath. Such a strange dream just now. And what were those words? When he tried to rise, something shifted against his lap amidst the sheets of his bed. Not heavy, but a noticeable weight all the same. He looked down. Frowned. Coughed twice, now. Rubbed his eyes with the back of both hands. Pinched himself too hard that tears stung his eyes. And yet when he opened them again, the image before him did not waver. For there was an anemo vision in his lap. His eyes widened. Trembling fingers reached out, caressing the glowing sphere. It felt faintly warm to the touch, beating like a distant heartbeat. This was wonderful. This was horrible. It would surely make him a target of the Weissenhunt decree, and yet, despite that, he couldn't bring himself to care. Unbidden, he recalled the words from his dream. Even the weakest man out there can become strong if you just believe in him. How long had he prayed for this moment? Hoping, wishing, fighting for a vision. Wind was the last element he'd expected to receive, but he felt blessed nonetheless. The Anemo god must have heard his pleas and granted them. With this, he could finally be useful. Not just to the resistance, but to General Goru and Lady Kokomi, too. Teppei held his prize close, cradling it to his chest as one might a fine gem. Thank you, Lord Barbatos. And he wept. Lisa's flat wasn't hard to find. Even with rambling instructions and a drunken Paimon to contend with, they made rather good time. The sun was only just starting to creep below the horizon by the time they reached her abode. He set Lisa down and she wriggled free with a sigh. A few failed attempts finally produced a ring of keys, one of which slotted into the lock. She lingered at the threshold, one leg crossed over the other. I really did enjoy tonight. Same. He really had. Maybe a change of pace wasn't so bad every once in a while. She lowered her gaze, suddenly find the floor far too fascinating for her own good. Her eyes were hidden by the rim of her hat, her emotions a tangled knot he couldn't hope to make sense of. Goodness, a hand came up to cup her cheek as she murmured to herself. What's gotten into me? I always thought I'd be a bit bolder than this. Something told him he hadn't been meant to hear that. Curse these keen ears of his. Lisa? She flung her hat at him. Catch! Instinct compelled Naruto to move and he caught it with both hands out of sheer habit. Unfortunately in doing so, he left himself wide open for the assault that followed. Moi! Something warm and soft brushed his cheek. Scarcely more than a peck, barely a feather's brush, so faint he almost thought he'd imagined it at first. It was only the faint scent of perfume, the feel of her body welded to his, that snapped him out of it. Lisa's hat fell from his fingers and fluttered to the floor. The gnosis in his chest sang, wind kicking up before he managed to wrestle it back down and get his feet on the ground. Lisa glided back, her face curiously red. Why don't you come inside? His brain misfired. I'm not trying to trick you. She swayed a little on her feet and caught herself on the door. Frankly, I'm not sober enough for that. Forward. Paimon slammed a shoulder into his back. It's cold out here and Paimon's freezing. He stumbled. Lisa pounced, latched onto his coat, and hauled him inside. The attack came just as Venti knew it would. He'd always know the Fatui would track him down sooner or later. It was not a matter of if, but merely when. This far into Liyue, he'd hoped they would let him be, that they would simply follow the storm and ignore him completely in the countryside. It was not to be. Of course, he was well prepared. When he first saw the shadows crest the hill, he made no move to flee. He simply continued to sit beneath his tree. Why wouldn't he? It was only when the agents drew closer that he finally deigned to rise. How chained to your daily toiling you are, he stood from a fallen log with a sigh. Must you intrude on a bard's leisure time? After all, it's more than language and poetry that flow with the wind. An agent flicked a knife at him. The knife shattered, with every bone in that arm. Barbado smiled as the man topped back with a shriek of pain. It was not a nice smile. Come now, he flicked a hand out, summoning his bow. Did you really think I would make it that easy? If you want me that badly, you'll have to work for it. Naruto woke to an unfamiliar ceiling. Cream-colored, all too ordinary, really, nothing to worry about. The initial raw panic and the pain of a hangover was muffled by the soft sensation of a warm body spooning into his side. He felt slim arms enfold him, the warmth of someone's breath against his neck as they slept peacefully. The wayward warrior exhaled sharply through his nose in a short, aggravated huff. Please don't be who I think it is, please don't be who I think it is. His eyes flitted left, now right, taking in his surroundings at a glance. It was a modest room all things considered, just the sort one might expect from a refined lady. All maroon and cream colors, with little in the way of furnishings beyond the bed, an oak nightstand and a pair of cushioned chairs. He found Paimon sprawled out atop one such chair, all but swaddled in blankets, dozing sleepily. A thin line of drool ran from her mouth as she muttered about food. Which meant? Against his better judgment, Naruto rolled over and looked down. Sure enough, he found Lisa's sleeping face tucked into his chest. He looked lower. Still clothed for the most part. That disappointed him somehow, but for the life of him he couldn't figure out why. He looked up, squinting as dappled sunlight poured in through a nearby window. Morning, then. Where had the time gone? And how did he end up here? Don't look at me. I wasn't the one who had too much wine. Lisa stirred against him before he could answer. Sleepy grass-green eyes fluttered open and blinked back at him. Widened now, as she realized where they were. They weren't undressed per se, but their clothes were certainly rumpled enough to suggest something had occurred. Something he couldn't remember. Naruto offered a sheepish smile. Morning? Shock faded, replaced by amusement. She leaned and kissed his neck. Morning yourself. So we didn't? No, I think not. She laughed. It'll take more than one date, dear, said smile faded once she realized what she was still wearing. Ugh, slept in my clothes, her brow furrowed. Not cute at all. Help me with this, would you? She turned and presented her back to him. Belatedly, he realized what she intended. Lisa wriggled her hips. It's a pain for me to reach. Unzipping her corset? Wasn't that a little intimate? His hands betrayed him, the traitors. So, what now? Now, she shook herself free and stood, presenting him with a tantalizing flash of dark lingerie when she paced away. I'm going to catch a quick shower, then I'll be off to visit my student. Her hips swayed as she glided toward what he could only assume was the bathroom door. Care to join me? A hand ran down her flank. I promise I'll be gentle. I'll pass this time. Your loss, she shrugged. Feel free to help yourself to the pantry downstairs in the meantime. Take whatever you need. His stomach growled treacherously. Might just do that. Good. After, you could stay here for a while. A lonely jade-eye stole over her shoulder. With me. You said you needed a place to stay, after all. I won't even charge you rent. Suspicion reared its ugly head in Naruto's heart. It was almost too good to be true. Certainly too convenient. Lisa wasn't simply going out of her way to accommodate him, it felt like she was trying to seduce him outright. If so, she was doing a fair job of it. The beginnings of a frown touched his lips. Jean didn't put you up to this? Her hands glided across his shirt, and for a moment he thought she'd drag him in for a kiss. Nope, she held back and gave him a nudge instead. I'm not going to jump you, silly. Now shoo. I need to clean up. In the end, Naruto was left to his own devices downstairs. Lisa kept a tidy, if cramped kitchen. Minutes passed as he rifled through the cabinets. There was fruit and grains aplenty, but nothing he could make off the top of his head. Perhaps that was for the best. He'd never been a terribly good cook. That was a skill he'd need to cultivate, and soon, if he wanted to survive in this world. Giving in, he settled for a score of apples and oranges. This should do. Might need more once we put this place behind us. A sleepy yawn cut through a muggy Mondstadt morning, informing him of Paymon's awakening. We're leaving already? But Paymon's still sleepy. He saw her drifted down the steps, heard yawn anew as she scrubbed at her bleary eyes. See, she hovered after them, looking about as haggard as he felt. That chair wasn't comfy at all. And we haven't had breakfast yet. Naruto plugged her mouth with an apple. Paimon made happy Paimon noises as he smiled. Feeling more awake now? Maybe, she muttered as she gobbled it down. Can Paimon have seconds? Of course you can, he chortled. As soon as we get back. Oh, and you're buying this time. Cheapskate. Now, Lisa sashayed past. That was a quick shower, adjusting her blouse and donning her hat once more. It's just a quick trip. The faint scent of shampoo tickled his nose as she strutted by, toweling off her damp hair. We'll be back before you know it. Oomph. Paimon huffed and crossed both arms before her chest, yielding at last. Fine, but Paimon wants to sleep in a real bed this time. Naruto clamped a hand around his mouth to stifle a smile. She really was too easy to tease. Almost made him feel bad. He'd get her a gift to make up for it. I'll warn you in advance. The librarian looked over her shoulder as she marched to the door, razors a little odd. As luck would have it, Lisa's so-called pupil found them. They'd only just made it to the outlands known as Wolvendom when Naruto felt his sixth sense tingle. Not from any such ill intent, mind you, he detected none, but rather the sudden realization that someone was there, a presence that hadn't been there before, shadowing them. And against that presence, a faint spark in the back of his mind. Was he able to sense visions, now? Oh! Lisa perked up, pulling him from his musings. There he is. A rough-looking boy materialized from the undergrowth only a yard to their right. Naruto took him in at a glance, red eyes and gray-silver hair, all wrapped up in faded leathers. The youth seemed hesitant at first, but one look at Lisa assuaged his fears and had him stepping forward, bold as a wolf. Purple teacher. His voice was quick, if rough. You came. Paimon squeaked. Where did he come from? Naruto's brow shot into his hairline. This is your student? You smell strange, the young lad sniffed once. Like fox, but also, wind, and sadness? Something came unspooled in Naruto's chest as the boy regarded him intently. As if he were waiting for something. But what? Blue eyes met red. Neither budged. Paimon and Lisa looked on, yet neither dared speak for fear of breaking the sudden tension. Finally, Razor took a step forward. Naruto mirrored him. And then, his hand snapped out. Pa! Razor's hand slapped down into his. Naruto couldn't help but grin. That settles it. You're adopted. Lisa touched one hand to her cheek. You know, I've always had a thing for single fathers. Oh! Those wild red eyes narrowed, noting his close proximity to Lisa. Teacher's mate, then. Lupical. Paimon squeaked. Oi. Lisa hummed and tugged him closed. We're working on that. Wait. Naruto made to reply, but the faint scent of smoke reached his nose. Do you smell that? He looked back, alarmed. Cherry red light danced in blue eyes in the distance, smoke rising high into the air. Why is the forest on fire? Razor groaned into one hand. The Red Bernie girl is here again. Naruto cocked a brow. Red Bernie girl? Who's that? Lisa winced. I believe I know who she is. Kaboom! The cry of a happy Klee filled the afternoon. An equally amused Naruto squinted against the sudden rush of heat and light, then raised a golden arm to ward off the ensuing explosion of water. It really was a very nice bomb. Thank goodness this one had gone off in a lake rather than the mountains. He found himself suddenly and terribly glad that he and Lisa had ushered her out here. Because now, rather than rubble, fish fell from the sky. Dozens rained down on high like holy manna, more than he dared count, each grilled to perfection. Rather than run around like a loon trying to catch each of them, he intercepted Klee's catch with a torrent of golden arms from his back. From there he deposited them into a series of large wicker baskets at his feet. One by one they were stowed away. Not a single tuna was missed. Klee wound up for another throw. Not bad, Kurama hummed from the shore, glowing with pride. But I think you can do better, don't you? Naruto agreed wholeheartedly on that front. Klee, wait, he called, unable to hide his smile. That's not how you go fish blasting. She lowered her arm, turned to look up at him in mild confusion. A tiny finger worried at her lower lip. It's not? Nope. He held up his hands toward the water. Light built around him, slightly more difficult with Kurama, occupied, but possible all the same. This is how you do it. Watch closely now. Somewhere behind him, he heard Lisa gasp. With a merry cackle that was entirely feigned for Klee's entertainment, Naruto let the tailed beast bomb fly. At full power, it would have evaporated the lake entirely and annihilated the bedrock beneath. Thankfully he'd held back. Rather than detonate outright, the dark sphere skirted the water's surface for an instant, then plunged into the depths. A moment passed. Klee raised a hand. Nothing happened. Naruto held up a finger. And then, thwoom! The water absolutely bulged upward in an expansive dome, then burst as his jutsu detonated. Scores of fish rained down, filling yet more baskets. They never stood a chance. Finding Klee? Easy. Keeping her entertained? Even easier. Who knew? If the deaths of a few fish were required to keep the little pyromaniac, well, their glorious sacrifices would be remembered. As would tonight's dinner. Klee glomped onto his leg, all but squealing with glee. You're the best. She squeezed a little tighter. Her grin was nothing short of contagious. Bestest uncle ever. Pure child. Must protect. A blonde brow rose even as his spirit soared. Klee, sweetie, I appreciate that and all, but you to realize I'm not really your uncle. You are. She glared up at him with ruby red eyes and squeezed his limb tighter. I said so. No takebax. Naruto's heart twitched in his chest. Uncle? Irk. He suspected Paimon might have something to say about Klee's phrasing just now. Strong words. Angry words. Words that involved a great deal of paimonial wrath. Thankfully she was very much occupied at the moment. Lisa's chin came down over his shoulder. Jean's not going to like this, you know, we're doing this in full view of the city. He'd given that all the consideration it was due. Namely? None. It wasn't as if they were harming anyone out here. And this way, folks got a little fireworks show before sunset. What was the harm? She can sulk all she wants. His gaze slid further down the shore in time to glimpse Paimon held by a laughing razor, slide down Kuram's back, glide off one of his many tails and splash into the water. Thankfully it was far, far away from where they'd been taking their potshots. Let the kids live a little. Or swim, he winced when Paimon told Razor off for that. Oh, she's not happy with him. The magician kissed his cheek, stepped back and sketched a false curtsy. As my Archon commands. Cheeky. He clicked his tongue at her. Very funny. Klee tugged at his sleeve. Again. Veto. Paimon floated their way with an indignant squeak, sputtering as she shook herself dry. Paimon's had enough. Can we go home now? Razor plodded after her at a more sedate pace, although his expression paled in comparison to hers. Small fairy is angry. Of course Paimon's angry, she rounded him with a scowl. You're too rough. Klee tilted her head. Ah, But I thought we were having fun. She huffed. You were. Razor kept dunking Paimon. Were we not playing? Naruto bit his lip to stifle a snicker. He must not crack. He absolutely must not crack. If he did, poor Paimon would go absolutely berserk. She looked so pitiful right now. Like an adorable kitten that had suffered one bath too many, so too did she look just shy of murder, not that she could do much in that field. Come here, you. Unable to conceal his smile in its entirety, he pulled off his jacket, ignoring the appreciative noise Lisa made, and padded over to Paimon. She saw him coming and tried to float back, only for him to loop an arm around her tiny shoulders and draw her close. Hey, she squeaked as he began to towel off her hair. MMPH? Her head poked up for a moment before he began to dry that off, too. Water you, quit it. There. Think of it this way, Naruto temporized with a raised finger as she struggled, if we preserve all this fish, you won't go hungry for a while. Lisa catoned on and steepled her fingers. I happen to know a few recipes you might like. Paimon paused. Inevitably her mouth began to water. All right, but this is the last time. Shinha had never been to Mondstadt. To be fair, she'd not left Liyue before either, so she supposed it should have been all one and the same. Should have. In theory. It wasn't. Not at all. The land of the Anemo Archon was not what she'd expected, all rolling hills and vast plains, scattered ruins alongside a great many trees. Less than Liyue perhaps, but she missed the mountain peaks all the same. It was not the home she knew, not the land she loved. It was just so, open. Mondstadt was not without its beauty to be sure, and she appreciated its nature all the same. Even so, it wasn't hers. Shinha felt vulnerable. Exposed, as she hadn't been since she was but a girl. Where were the misty mountain peaks she so favored? The Chinchin flowers, the quiet solitude? More than that. There were so many travelers on the road today, knights making their rounds, merchants bearing heavy carts, even the occasional wanderer leaning on a gnarled staff. Each stopped to greet her, and while she didn't much mind that, what she did mind was the way their gazes lingered on her. Not just the men, but the women, too. Baffling. Why were they staring so? Just thinking about it drew a scowl to her lips. Not for the first time, she wondered if she'd made a mistake in accepting this mission. An exhausted messenger from Rex Lapis had come before Cloud Retainer some days ago and presented a message to her master, who promptly entrusted her with the delivery of said missive in turn. No fool, she. Shinha had seen right through HR ruse. Her teacher wasn't half as clever as she thought herself, she could have easily delivered such a missive in half the time it had taken her. No, this was an excuse. Cloud Retainer wanted her to stretch her wings, as it were, to venture forth and see the human world again, if only for a short time. Pointless, she muttered, clutching the scroll to her chest. There's nothing for me, here. Nothing but wild hills and the occasional monster. Those she froze and left to melt in waning light of the setting sun. Shinha had accepted this task if only begrudgingly, because she knew if she hadn't, Master would have fallen into one of her moods again. No one wanted that. Definitely not Mooncarver or Mountain Shaper. Certainly not her. Rather than dwell on that unpleasant thought, she considered her map with a frown. I suppose this is the place. In truth, a map wasn't much needed. The city was quite visible to her from the hill she'd claimed for herself. The problem would be with what came after. Liyue was large to be sure, but she at least knew her way around. Not so the city that sprawled in the distance. She would have to enter it, if she wanted to discharge her duty. Her destination was simple. Head for the city and inquire at the cathedral within for this so-called Archon. To deliver a message unto a newly born Archon, she supposed it was a great honor. Truth be told, she didn't much understand the puprose. A scroll was a scroll just as an Archon was merely a powerful person. Perhaps she was oversimplifying it, but then again, she'd always had difficulty expressing herself. Perhaps the red ropes that bound her soul were to blame. She hadn't always been such before them. Still, standing here would avail her nothing. A distant explosion rang out, and Shinha watched the surface of the Lake Royal. Almost as if something were rising from within. Screams went up from the city. Her eyes widened. The scroll went forgotten, hastily stowed as she summoned her polearm. If there was a monster in the lake, she would deal with it, Archon be damned. She didn't walk towards the disturbance. She ran. As such, she didn't see the explosion. But she heard it. More cries went up. She moved fast. Long strides devoured the distance as she raced down the hill and toward the city. A stray hilichurl tried to bar her path and was summarily frozen for their efforts. She spared them no more thought than one would a leaf in the wind. What manner of monster was rising from the lake? Was it the remains of a dead god? Something worse? Or? It was only when she drew nearer, just within the tree-line, that she realized her mistake. She spied a blond man sat next to a massive golden beast with 9 tails on the sandy shore. A brunette clad in purple and white was sprawled over him in a suggestive manner. Together, they watched 3 children toss strange sphere-like objects into the water. Each created a miniature explosion, but nothing like the first she'd seen. The lake was still now, glassy save the blasts near the shoreline. As she looked on aghast, the blonde raised a hand and pumped his fist into the air. "That a girl, Klee. Throw it further next time." The smaller girl struggled with her sphere. "Paimon wants to try. Unless you have an undiscovered affinity for explosions, that's not likely." "Lisa's a meanie. More fireworks, please." All right, hold your horse's razor." The blonde raised his hand and the beast beside him yawned in response. Black light burst from its jaws and soared into the air, easily missing the city. It detonated high the clouds, spraying motes of sapphire and scarlet light about. Another cry went up from the city. Realization dawned. They weren't screaming in fear. They were cries of joy. He was entertaining them. Chanel felt her eyes widen, the faintest hint of emotion breaking through. That was the Archon. Had to be. Who else could wield such power? Her gaze focused on the younger ones. She couldn't see them properly at this distance, but they were undoubtedly younger than the man and woman. Her heart lurched in misunderstanding. Family. This was a family enjoying their evening. A mother and a father, and their 3 children. She could only assume thus. Judging by their smiles, they cherished their offspring. She hadn't been cherished. A memory broke through the red ropes and with it came a rare flash of anger. "You are a cursed child." Shinha bit her lip until she tasted blood. The pain didn't quite center her, but the awful taste did help her wrestle her focus back from the brink. This was none of her concern. She had a message to deliver, nothing more and nothing less. To let herself be weighed down by such foolish sentiment would surely prove her undoing. With a toss of her hair she stalked forward, making her presence known in body, if not word. "You, there." The blonde looked up at her approach first, a blonde brow quirked in query. "Can I help you? Are you the Archon?" The woman laughed even as the man coughed. "Much as I wish I weren't." His presence was warm. That was the best word she could think to describe him. Her vision, entwined in her hair, began to resonate, and she found herself struck by the sudden urge to sit and simply bask in the peace he exuded. What drivel! She ignored it. "Well, whatever the case, we were just about to have a fish dinner." He offered her a cheery grin. "Care to join us? There's more than enough to go around." Shinha reached for the message cylinder bound at her hip. Paused, as she saw the baskets filled with fish. She understood. He'd been blasting the lake to stun the fish, thereby forcing them to the surface. A cruder way of fishing she'd never seen. It was something of a humbling realization. Here was someone with great power, power that far exceeded her own, and yet for all that, he looked happy. Not restrained, not held back, nor limited in any way. No red ropes for his and him, no sir. He was unbound and happier for it. Damn the gods. They could live as they pleased, without a care in the world, while she, a mortal, struggled with her own homicidal nature. It stung. The woman must have seen some of her sorrow, because she patted the log beside her. "It's no trouble at all. You must be famished." She really was no resist. Shinha slammed the scroll into his hands and whirled away. "There. I've done my part. Good day to you." The blonde burst to his feet and caught her wrist. "Wait a sec. What's the hurry?" Shinha grit her teeth hard enough to crack a molar. "Calm. She must be calm. I do not want your pity." And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like, subscribe, share and support the original writer. See you in the next video?